This is Perspective on Athletics, big thinking for small colleges. Sit back and enjoy this episode. Okay, we're here with Matt Donovan of the University of Indianapolis, and looking forward to a great conversation with you today. Matt, I really appreciate you taking time and joining us here on Perspective on Athletics.
Great to be with you, Mark. Thanks for the time.
Absolutely. Well, I got to know you, Matt, at the Business of Small College Athletics workshop a few weeks ago in Oklahoma City, and you had a great presentation about fundraising, specifically making the ask, and I want to have you talk a little bit about that. But before we get into some of the specifics, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into the business and what led you to the position that you are in today at University of Indianapolis.
Great. I was a graduate of Western Illinois University in 1989, which seems like moons and forever ago. And at that point in time, when I was leaving Western, I thought, I really wanted to be in athletics, kind of like a lot of people, but I was open to pretty much anything. And I had the opportunity to go to work at Purdue University working in sports information, and I kind of worked on that for the first 2 years. And I always remember, which I truly enjoyed, because I just felt being at a Big Ten college was great, and my family had really Purdue ties. So you want to talk about a kid who felt like he hit a home run. I felt like I had that situation. But really by the end of the second year, I was doing sports information, some publications. I really kind of felt like I needed to really evaluate what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And it was funny, I had a colleague at Purdue that said, I think you really ought to go into fundraising. Well, ironically enough, when I was in college, before I graduated, I did an internship with a non-for-profit organization, which really I was doing a lot of asking and kind of fundraising events. And never in my lifetime did I think I would get right back into fundraising. And I laugh even to this day that I think back to that internship really with that non-for-profit organization was something that really brought a lot of the characteristics of what I do today. It really made me understand and realize what I was capable of. So I moved to University of Advancement of Purdue, and I stayed there for 2 more years working at University of Advancement. And then I had the opportunity to go to work at University of Pennsylvania. And I thought, and I laugh to this day, I tell people, I said to myself, either I'm going to stay in West Lafayette for the rest of my life, or I need to step out of my little comfort zone and explore. And I think Penn was the best place for me to do that because being an Ivy League school, a phenomenal institution when it comes to fundraising, who was in the midst of a capital campaign. So this was a great experience for me to go to an Ivy League school. Here I am in central Indiana going to Philadelphia, so you can't ask for a better opportunity to step out of your world. And I laugh to this day. The campaign at Penn was $1.3 billion, and I said to myself, holy cow, $1.3 billion, well, that's probably like on the radar screen today. But it taught me a lot of things as to understand environments. And Penn was great because of the Ivy League and the tradition. And you can't ask for a better institution to raise money. They're phenomenal. And that was a great experience for me to understand a different role, a different world, a different environment. But at the same point in time, it really enhanced my fundraising skills. And it really taught me about campaigns and, more importantly, how, and when we look to it today, how people make gifts. Because those guys were pros, and that really was a great situation for me to really advance my fundraising career based upon the opportunities that they provided to me and really getting to see a campaign of the magnitude that they had. But at that point in time, I really was trying to decide, where do I want to go from here? Because the campaign was going to end, by the time the year ended, by the middle of summer. And I had a colleague of mine who I worked with at Purdue, went to the University of Indianapolis, and he called me one time, hadn't stayed in touch too much, and he said, what do you think you're going to do next? I said, I'm open to anything. And he said, well, I think we got an opportunity at the University of Indianapolis. And it was perfect because I'm a Midwestern guy, and the campaign was going to end at Penn, and I said, okay, took it. And I will be honest with you, I think that was probably one of the best things that I could have done because I, like a lot of people, thought, okay, this is, a Division II school, maybe a smaller school. Probably had some preconceived notions, which were not a good idea, and I strongly advise people never have preconceived notions. But that was the best thing for me, because when I got here, and I say this to a lot of people, I went to University of Indianapolis, and I felt like I can make an impact. And that's no disrespect to Purdue, no disrespect to Penn. That's just my nature, and that's just my personality. And I thought, okay, I'll go to University of Indianapolis. I'll really do a lot of great things. And, probably move on to another place. And this starts my 20th year at University of Indianapolis. So obviously you can see I'm not good at Vegas odds. I'm not good at predicting. I just, that pretty much tells me I'm never going to go to ESPN and do any of those kind of prediction shows, because they'll lose money on me. But I think one of the things I realized in that time frame is being here at an institution like this has given me the opportunity to really make an impact. And I think that's so important for a lot of people to understand today.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting environment, and people that think about small colleges that have never been there really don't have an idea, and they do have those preconceptions about what it must be like. And those of us that have worked in small colleges, I think often you find people stay there for a long time for lots of the very positive things that you've made reference to, and I think that you're experiencing there. But you went from Big Ten to the Ivy League, and then to the NCAA Division II level, and fundraising at each of those levels. And Division II is certainly a different pond to fish in, maybe, compared to a Big Ten school and the fan base that you might have, or the alumni base that you might have. In general, what do you see out there for smaller colleges and fundraising for athletics specifically? What's it like compared to a bigger school, which you have some experience? How would you describe it?
I think the biggest difference you see from a bigger school to really a Division II school is really the creativity you have to put in front of yourself. And what I mean by that is, a perfect example at Purdue University, you can rely on personal seat license to suites to, basically saying you're going to pay for that special seat in the arena. Okay, well, I don't have that privilege. I certainly don't have that special campaign approach that I can use. So you have to be really creative, and you have to understand at a Division II school, you have to really know your environment as to how you can develop campaigns, how you can find revenue, and how are you going to go about creating revenue. I think it's the biggest aspect. And I can use a really good example. When I arrived in '94, we had no athletic fundraising whatsoever. And I remember telling my boss at the time, I said, we need to go ask former athletes for gifts and develop a program. And he said, are you sure that's going to work? And my point of that is you have to really look at what you have and try to draw out those revenue aspects. And fast forward from that standpoint, we charge for parking, and we charge a lot of seat situations. So I think a lot of it is when you look at Division II, and I use this from a really good friend of mine who was a colleague at East Carolina. He used to say to me, let me tell you something, everything is relevant. You may get really good results from your letter winners where you may not get a lot from your, current students. Well, we get really good responses from our current students, but we don't get a great response out of our letter winners. So, and really, I say this a lot, the ask is pretty much the same. The campaigns are pretty much the same, but it's what your environment is and how you try to develop success is critical. And how you evaluate that, it's almost like, when you go to buy a house, you have to evaluate so many things before you say, sure. Well, when you're developing a program, you better evaluate all the things you have in order to be successful.
Yeah. What has worked most successfully for you, though? You're in maybe not a major market, but your major market in the sense that you've got other larger universities surrounding you. You've got a professional sports franchise or two right there. So where have you gone for revenue opportunities? Is it primarily with school affiliated groups like alumni or parents or things like that? Or have you been able to get into the local community and generate support that way too?
We've done both. We've been very fortunate that we have a strong alumni support. And I think that's been critical. When we first started, we really wanted to develop our events where they'd be first class. And part of that is because those events were so first class, it got everybody to believe and everybody to buy in. And when people started to buy in, what happened after that is then they started to expand that base for us. And the really important aspect that I try to tell people is when you develop your events and you have those events, make sure you do them perfect, make sure you do them great, and make sure you follow up for engagement standpoint, because those people tend to walk away, and if they're not happy, you know as well as I do, they're going to kill you. And so what we did is we developed those events where they were very successful for us, and then they became our best advocates. So once we got those going, we developed a really strong volunteer program. So where we were asking people amongst the volunteers to help us really go raise or to get people engaged. And then the other aspect is kind of the same approach. We then kind of took a step back and then went to the parents. And our approach to the parents has always been, look, we have over 30% of our former athletes give. So you can obviously see there is a strong exclamation point about Greyhound athletics. And that's why we believe we need you to help us enhance those percentages and make people aware. And then really, to be honest with you, the next piece we took from that is then we went out into the corporate community to develop a sponsorship program. Because you know as well as I do, the first thing that a sponsor may ask is, what's the involvement you have within your community? So it was easy for us to say, look, our parents buy into it, our faculty staff buy into it, and our alumni buy into it. And that was a big hurdle that we had to get over. But once we did, we found tremendous success from that standpoint.
To have over 30% of your former student athletes giving, which I think is what you said, that I think is a phenomenal rate, because typically student athletes seem to not give back. They seem to be the ones that don't. How did that get going? And when you first started your Greyhound Club, I mean, what were some of the hurdles, or how did you get past those hurdles to get those numbers up so high?
Well, I think the biggest thing we did is we developed a board of volunteers. And I think this is a critical aspect that people need to understand. You really have to define what those people are to do. And you really have to rely on them to really help you. And I say this all the time, you have to be very engaging with those folks and telling people how you can help them, or better yet, how they can help you, excuse me. And I think we did a very good job of that, but we didn't really jump into this with big bells and whistles. We took a lot of baby steps to enable us to get to where we were. And I think it's so important today, because you hear people say, we're going to develop this program. Okay, how much resource do you have to that? How many personnel people do you have to that? How much budget do you have? And I think you have to really kind of plan your approach in a sense of saying, okay, we're going to really rely on our volunteers to help us from our board, and those people will help us with our events. And at the same point in time, they will help us really ask other people to make a gift. And it's funny, our first year, and I share this with a colleague that asked, they were all excited their very first year. No, I'm sorry, they were very disappointed the very first year they only had 200 donors. And I chuckled and I said, well, that's pretty good. My first year I had 33 donors. And now we just finished with 2,000 last year. So I think it's very critical, Mark, that you have to really develop that plan. You have to really be cognizant of what you want to try to accomplish in year one and what you want to accomplish in year two. And I use this line all the time, Rome wasn't built in a day. So you have to really understand, okay, in my first year, I may just do a couple mail solicitations. I may do a phone-a-thon. I may do a thank-a-thon. Do those things that make people buy in. I think you also have to be very patient. Because the key part is the very first year, as I tell people, they're going to want to know, are you going to be around in year two? Are you going to be around in year three? Are you going to be around in year four? So if you develop that approach as to how you're going to do that, then the sustainability and the confidence will then follow. But let me just say this, as I say to people all the time. There are about, 1.3 million non-for-profits. The number could be higher than that. There's always somebody asking one of your alums or parents every day for a gift. So what are you doing to basically engage that person to give? And that's what we did a lot of. We did a lot of the personalization aspect. Even though we didn't have a very big staff, we took our time to make sure that we wrote handwritten notes. We did a lot of email information. Our board meetings were very structured so that people felt like they were really succeeding something. And I think that's what's really helped us to where we have gotten today.
Yeah. Matt, how much does winning play into successful fundraising at your level, and has it played a role over the time that you've been there in growing your support?
I think the one thing, and I always chuckle and smile when that question comes up, I have a guy who I have a great deal amount of respect for, Mark Jennings at Iowa. He and I used to always share this question all the time. And I can say this, winning helps develop enthusiasm. Okay? Let me just say that. Winning helps develop enthusiasm. Does it help making Matt Donovan write a check? No. What helps making Matt Donovan write a check is that relationship. And how is that relationship with the institution, with the program, at the highest it's ever been? And if that relationship with that program is at the highest it's ever been, then the enthusiasm makes that person want to give, wants to get involved even more. But does that determine whether or not Matt Donovan's going to write you a $25,000 check to a $50,000 check? I mean, obviously other people could say otherwise, but I really believe in the bottom line of today's world in philanthropy, it's about the relationship. Because I've seen a lot of lean years around UIndy, and we still had progress and we still had growth. And some of our programs were not at the highest we've ever been. But I'm going to tell you, when we've had some success here lately, it just develops the enthusiasm. It gets people to want to go get somebody else to get involved. It gets somebody to want to go buy more merchandise, to buy tickets, and so on and so forth. But as you know, Mark, in today's society and with the economy, people are very, very conscientious of what their dollar is utilized for and what it goes to. And that just boils down to the relationship.
I think that's such a key point, and especially as I want to transition now to this whole concept of being able to make the ask and getting up the courage in some cases. I think this is one thing I know as an athletic director. When I was trying to raise funds, I did a great job of trying to build people up and build some relationships, but it was difficult for me to actually make the ask. And the bottom line is if you don't ask, they're not going to just offer up. So what are some things that you've coached people on, or your own staff with, or what you've learned over the years about how do you get to that point of actually making the ask and being successful at it?
I think the biggest thing you really have to do is clearly you've identified Matt Donovan as a prospect, okay? And how do you get yourself to be able to connect with Matt Donovan is number one. I mean, I think that's very important. How do you connect with that person? And I've had and it's funny, I had a colleague who I used to work with used to say to me all the time, go in and ask right away on the first visit. And I'd look at him like, are you out of your mind? No. I typically say to even my people on my staff, usually by the third time you're thinking about how you're going to ask. And it's funny, I always say if that relationship is at the best it's ever been, and if the relationship is perfect, 9 times out of 10, they're going to give you the money before you get to even asking. So a lot of it is really getting to know the individual. And that is what are their interests? What do they like? What do they dislike? What do they feel pleased about? What do they really find as their special needs that they are involved with? And I think if you can develop those aspects, or better yet, know those aspects, that helps you from a standpoint of getting to the part of asking. Because as I say to somebody, people say this all the time about philanthropy, it's kind of like sales. Well, that could be open for discussion anyway, how you want to look at it. But I always say to somebody, okay, well, we'll take the sales approach. If you're going to call Matt Donovan, and I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to ask him, okay, what do you know about him? And then pick up the phone. And so that is really a great structure and a great lesson plan to say, okay, I want you to go find out how Matt Donovan can make a gift. What are you going to know? How much you want to ask? What are you thinking about? What are the interests? And that's what I try to preach to people today. Know those things in that, not about the asking, about the individual. And I say to people a lot, you have to have a game plan. And what I mean by that is know what that person has an interest, know what they are involved with, know all of it. And I think what you find is as you develop that relationship, the asking is a simple part of the process. Because that person tends to think, I really like what you're doing. And I say this a lot to people in a sense. The critical things is know how that person can help you. Not so much you, the institution. I use this story a lot, and I think you might have heard me say this. There's some There's a great story of a wealthy donor being asked by another wealthy donor in New York City who simply said, what the heck do you need me to do? So let's stop talking about this. Tell me what you need me to do. And that's the key part. Okay, so you have to know what it is you think you want that person to help you with. You also need to know how is it going to be of a benefit to them. And what I mean by that is when we mean about benefit to them, what makes them feel positive about it? Because at the end of the day, they want to feel like they've made an impact. And if you can focus on those aspects, and I think the key part is you have to really know, I use this line all the time, you're going to have to be able to answer the question why. So Mark comes and asks Matt, Matt's going to say, why, Mark? And so you have to be able to emphasize the importance and the critical aspects that it provides. Because if you don't have those little points that I talked about, you're pretty much going to find that that ask that you're going to talk about is really not going to do you a lot of good. So have a lesson plan. And I say this to everybody who, even to my staff, they say, I'm going to go to lunch with the prospect. There's got to be a purpose for that lunch. What is that purpose for that lunch other than, hi, how are you, and how's the food? What's the purpose for that lunch, and what do you want to try to accomplish? And I think the other aspect is, how are you going to follow up with that person?
Yeah, I think those are great points. Now, I'm curious, obviously the relationship building is important when you're dealing with major gifts or something more substantial or building these longer term relationships. But what about, how does this all relate to your booster club, your Greyhound Club, and these annual gifts that might be $50 to $150 that might come from different solicitation methods? How does this all play into kind of the annual giving aspect on a smaller scale?
I think the biggest thing you have to really look at in today's, especially from let's say you have a donor who's a $50 donor, what captures their attention? The critical aspect today is and we try to focus that a lot, but I think it's important for everybody. What will capture that person's attention? And if that is, ironically enough, we use all kinds of social media, and we use still really the phone as well as the mail. What is going to get that person to really pay attention? So you get that person to really obviously pay attention, or you got their time. What is that message, or what is that visualization, or what is that type of approach that gets them to react? I think we all learned as even children, it's response and react. Well, if you take those two parts of response and react, and how is it that you are really developing your message that makes that person respond and react is important. I use a great analysis and a great little idea. We did this. I took it from a friend of mine who was at Xavier. We sent a solicitation letter that simply said, blah, 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 blah. Please make a gift, blah, 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 blah. Please know your support will mean a great deal to our over 500 student athletes, blah, 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 blah. Thanks, Matt. That thing blew the charts off. It just absolutely blew the charts. And the key part of that was it really told us something. It was not so much the response, it told us something. And what it told us told really our office is that creativity is the key. And how you really get that person to really understand what you're asking. I mean, you can write the nicest letter known to mankind, but is that person really going to react or respond based upon what you send them?
That's the whole key, I think. So I think those are some good points. I want to ask you about your situation again, because what you did at UIndy really was taking something from nothing to where you are now, which is a very successful fundraising program. But for some folks at small college level, they may not yet have a development officer, or maybe the AD
Right.
that is, responsible for this as a part of their job. And it's tough for some people to, I think, digest, well, how am I going to add this to my plate, or how can I do some of these things? So as you look at the success you've had in your role, but you're aware of these other situations out there, what might be the most important things to you that you would advise other athletic directors who maybe don't have a development officer or development staff to lean on a little bit to start building their development operation? What would be most important, do you think?
I think you have to really, it goes back to the old point, you got to ask. And even if you have somebody in the department or you don't, I'll take the approach of, let's say you're an athletic director and you really don't. And obviously you have to get approval from your university advancement people. You have to ask, and you have to develop some sort of, for a better word, pot, club, whatever, to be able to receive those gifts and deposit those gifts, and more importantly, recognize those gifts. So the interesting thing is, if you're starting from ground zero, I think you got to develop some type of fund, whether it be club, whatever the case may be, to be able to accept those gifts. And as somebody who may not have a lot, you really want to be out there asking. As you're out there asking, ask a person to make a gift and to know that it's going to be put in this vehicle that we use, and then obviously it'll be receipted. I use a statement, and I think it's important that a lot of people understand. Every institution, I don't care where you're at, is going to want somebody to make a gift. It could be for the arts, it could be for, special departments, special programs. So get out there and ask. But develop that program and develop that, mechanism that enables that person to make the gift and be receipted, as well as be, recognized. And then you can develop yourself from there. If somebody said to me, Matt, I've got to develop, what am I going to do? Send 3 letters a year. So when at the beginning of the school year, when everybody's excited because the school year has started, right before the end of the calendar year because tax purposes, and then right before the end of your fiscal year. Not a lot of money. And you know what? You probably get, 4%, maybe a little higher off of each one of them. But when you stop to think about it, that's a lot of money that's out there. And the key aspect, and I think you would agree with me, have a specific amount when you're asking. Nothing drives me crazy when somebody will say, can you just make a gift? Gift of what? Dollars, money, product, what? Ask for something. Yeah. I think that's important. You have to ask for something, because if you don't ask for something, you're not going to get it. Yeah. And so, people say this all the time, and I agree wholeheartedly. You don't ask for a certain amount, you're not going to get it. And if people say, well, what if I ask for too much? Today's society, whether I've been 20 years ago, people like being asked for more than what you think. Right. Makes them feel like they're special. And I had a conversation with a colleague one time. He said, I can't believe you'd ask for an amount that high on an individual. I said, well, you know what? By the end of the meeting, that person's going to think he's pretty special because we made him feel like he could be the main benefactor of what we wanted. Right. And everybody's got an ego.
No, it's very important. I think, like you've been talking about, really the bottom line is you're not going to get an answer of yes unless you ask. And you might get a no, but at least you've got to ask and find out where you are. So I think those are the key points.
And we've all been told no 1,000 times before, and it's never hurt our feelings. We all go back to the well. We all keep going from that standpoint. And if you're not asking, somebody else is.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that people need to get over, is that they will take that no personally, and it's their anxiety about hearing that no is what prevents them from making the ask in the first place. But you get over that fairly quickly, I think, in your business.
I agree.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, Matt, those have been some great points, and I think people really ought to take a look at what you've done at UIndy and learn from your success and what you've been able to accomplish there. On a slightly different note, I always like to ask people about college athletics today and the importance of leadership, and I want to get your thoughts on leadership in general. What do you think is important for leadership today in collegiate athletics, where we're headed, and what people should be focusing on? And what are those things that good leaders do in intercollegiate athletics today, and get your thoughts on some of those things?
That's a very hot topic, and it's a very sensitive topic for me personally, because I tend to think leadership is very important. And it's an ever-changing, I think you would agree with me, it's an ever-changing dynamic out there today. What leadership would have been 15 years ago is completely different than what it is today. And I will share with you a couple things that I stress amongst my staff, and that is, and I think you'll chuckle when you hear me say this because you've probably been the benefactor of it. If you email me, you're going to get a response no later than 48 hours. You're going to get a response within 48. If I can't get to you, I'm going to say, look, I apologize for not being back to you in a quicker manner, because as you, the donor or potential donor, you want to be felt like you're important. And if you don't respond to somebody quickly, you're not telling that person they're important. And so I tell my staff, you're going to respond within 48 hours. If you leave me a voicemail, you're going to respond in 48 hours. if you make a gift, I don't care if it's $15 to $15,000, you're going to get a hand personal thank you note. And the other aspect of this is always be prepared to say, you know what, you're right. Okay? You don't have to say you're wrong. You need to basically understand at some point in time, if you're doing something, you're right. That's a good point. The donor is always right. Okay? The donor is always right, to a certain extent, of course. But the point of what I say in leadership, and I'm using the development aspect, those are certain things that make people believe they are very important in an institution. And I think it's critical as development people, we have to do that. And if you're not going to do that, and I say to my staff all the time, if you're not going to do those things, you need to find a different place to be. And I say to people all the time that work for me, you need to understand you're on the clock 24/7. And I'm sorry that's the way it is, but that's just the way it is. And so I say to them all times, you know, you're going to go to a certain place in the city of Indianapolis, you better mind your P's and Q's. Because with social media today and the way people are, they can make a fool out of you and nothing flat. And while you think you look like a fool on social media, it's not the damage control you got to do, it's the damage control I've got to do. Right. And I have a hard time with that because that drives me crazy. Because if you don't appreciate the position you're in, who you're representing, and what you're doing, then you are really doing a disservice not only to yourself, you're doing a disservice to the job. And Bobby Purcell at NC State always tells me this, you know what? You have to be professional 24/7. And I love to tell this story. I used to go to church every Sunday. I'm a good Catholic Irish boy, go to church, had a pair of jeans, always had a hole in it, and it was the most comfortable jeans. You probably know that, you know. And I went and I walked out, and this gentleman said, "You're Matt Donovan, you know, you work in athletics at UIndy." I had no idea who this person was. And that was a great lesson to me in a sense that you sometimes are a face, and that person represents something. And so you have to understand, you have to be professional, you have to look professional, and you have to act professional at all times. And that drives me crazy. And so from a leadership standpoint, the other part of it too is you have to look at your people. You have to look at them and understand what is good about them and what strengths do they have and how do you move them and manage them to be successes. And I use a lot of that with the people I kind of interact with from a standpoint. Yeah, we know what their weaknesses are. They don't need to know that. Okay? It's your job to get the most out of them and how to move them. Just like a donor, we use the words moves management. Your job is to move your people in a management role to make them succeed. Because when they succeed, you succeed.
Absolutely. Great points. And in a quick story I'll share, you know, from my personal experience, we had one of our best donors who was also a golfing buddy, and we'd always go golfing. And the donor is always right, correct? But it was very difficult to make sure he always won on the golf course. That was one of my biggest challenges, you know, to keep the donor happy.
I tell you this all the time. People say to me, "You're the most social golfer known to mankind." I said, "Do you really think I'm going to beat you? Then me turn around and ask you for a gift? That's a good idea?" No.
Yeah.
You know, my job is to socialize and make you feel good. And if I'm going to come out and beat you in golf, then I've got to be the dumbest fundraiser out there in mankind. And as I say to them all the time, when I retire, then maybe, I'll make the senior tour. But till then, no. It's about that person right then.
You got to know your place, right? Well, speaking of, to wrap up the section, I always also like to ask our guests about your thoughts on new people trying to break into the business, whether it is fundraising or any job in intercollegiate athletics today. There are more people out there looking for jobs than I think are actual jobs out there. So everybody's always looking for an edge and looking for advice. So whether you do this on a regular basis or if you have the opportunity, what would you say to some young up-and-comer, recent graduate or graduate student today looking to break into college athletics? What's your advice to them?
I think it's probably nothing they haven't heard before. I think you have to get a ton of practical experience, and you got to check yourself at the door. You know, you're going to have to be able to do the little things you probably don't think you want to do, and you're going to have to really give a little bit of blood, sweat, and tears, and really work a little hard. But you know what? And I use the analogy, especially when we see all these high salaries for coaches today, and God love them for getting it. But what they're accomplishing is not any different than what we can accomplish, because that coach, who's obviously getting a really good contract, had to put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears a long time ago. And there's great promise and there's great success in our industry. So the times have changed for the better, even for people in the administration. But it still goes back to the point: you're going to have to really work hard. You're going to have to really give a lot. And the other part of it is you're going to have to understand there's certain things that you're going to have to do that you probably don't, think, and understand one thing: you may have a job description, but that doesn't solely mean that's what you do, okay? And if you understand you're going to do your job description and a lot of other things, you have great promise on the horizon. If you want to really narrow it down to a certain area, okay, that's probably what you're going to be really good at. And I think the other thing that what people need to understand is the handwritten thank you note, or the thank you, or appreciate it, or the follow-up is volumes. And I use something with a lot of GAs or kids that work for me, and they go on to have an interview. And I think you'll find this really important. The first thing I say to them, when you're done with the interview, I'll say to them, what's the first thing you're going to do? And they'll be like, I don't know. I say, you're going to write a handwritten thank you note, and you're going to go to the post office. You're going to put it in the mail right then. And they think, and I said, because you know why? Because every person, and as you do it as well as I do, when you get a thank you note, you look at what that postmark is. They'll see that if you had an interview in Chicago and you put the thank you note in Chicago when you're really going back to Indianapolis, that says something about you, and it says something about the position, and it says something about what you want to accomplish. And so those are little things that you have to do, and unfortunately nobody tells you this. And my mom, who will appreciate hearing this, always taught me that you have to remember a person's name. And I say that is so important. And trust me, there are moments that I kind of lose, like, holy crap, who is this? But it's the importance of saying Mark, Jim, Mike, whatever the case would be, because that's critical. And I unfortunately don't think a lot of people teach that today, but those are the little things that help people become successes later on. The work ethic is a critical part.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And like I say, I think everybody's just looking for some sort of advantage or an edge because it is so competitive out there. But I think those are great points from somebody who's been in the business a long time. Matt, we need to wrap this up. And I want to thank you again for your time and sharing your perspective on fundraising and specifically making the ask, and as well as your thoughts on leadership and advice for up-and-comers. This has been a great interview. We hope that we can call you back sometime and have you back on to discuss some more things.
Be happy to do it. Thank you for the time. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Matt Donovan, University of Indianapolis. Thanks again.
Thank you.